Joanne Harris, welcome back to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me back.
Oh, it's our absolute pleasure. And it's very exciting because we're here to discuss your new novel, A Narrow Door, which is the fourth in the Mulberry series set in St Oswald's School. And the school has a new headmistress, Rebecca Buckfast, and it's opening its gates to female students. This feels very timely. Can you tell us about A Narrow Door, please, Joanne?
Well, I've always had a fondness for St Oswald's, but I've always felt also that it was destined to change. And last year, at least in St Oswald's terms, there was a bit of an overhaul. A crisis team was brought in to fix the failing grammar school, and a part of it stayed. And this part is Rebecca Buckfast, who has become the new head, the first headmistress the school has ever had since its existence in the 16th century. And dear old Roy Straightley, who is my returning hero, the Latin master who is constantly on the verge of retirement, but who can't quite get himself to retire, is finding this his greatest challenge yet. Girls in the school, a woman at the helm. What next? Well, what next is that a group of his boys find what seem to be human remains on the building site, which is to be one of the grand new buildings that the head has planned for the school. And the body has a story. Now, Straightley, of course, goes directly to the head, knowing that any new scandal on the top of the scandals that have preceded this may well topple the school anyway. And he is surprised and disconcerted to find that not only does she not seem that surprised, but she seems to know a lot more about this rather ancient bundle of human remains than is good for anybody concerned. And so as the story begins to unravel from her perspective, it becomes clear that there is a great deal more in her past than we know. And this past also includes various key personnel at St Oswald's, including Straightley himself, tangentially, at least. And so it's a bit of a story within a story, or several stories, in fact, which open up like layers in an onion, revealing finally the truth at the heart of the mystery.
Wonderful stuff. What is it about the Mulberry series and St Oswald's that keeps you coming back? Is there a kind of a particular itch that you're scratching when you write these books?
Well, I think it's my homeopathic dose of being a teacher, just to remind me why I left. I was a teacher for over 15 years. I was good at it. I loved it. I get the feeling that I left at just the right time, because it's getting increasingly hard to be a teacher nowadays, even in the independent sector, which I left just when I think the direct grant system had been abolished. So there was still an element of fairness to it. So I'm still kind of mostly rooted in the 80s and now 90s in my teaching memory, which is why these books are set at that time. But I'm still very fond of those memories, and I still have a lot of stories to tell, which, although not directly based on things that really happened, have a certain amount to do with my own experience.
Just on a personal note, I want to thank you for your story about the boy who dropped the crisp packet that you shared on Twitter last week, because my parents were school cleaners. My dad was a school caretaker. Then he left and mum became the school caretaker. And she also had to have a second job cleaning offices in town. And I would go with her after school. And, we'd go in these offices and people would just leave their mugs out, and they'd been left there for hours and they were stained. And it was that attitude of, we have people to do that sort of thing. It's well, yeah, but if you took it to the kitchen, it wouldn't take us twice as bloody long to do it. So I really, for those who didn't see the tweet, could you share that story with us, please?
Oh, this was absolutely a real story. There was no fiction about this at all. It was when I just arrived at Leeds Grammar School, which was the template for St Oswald's. And I'd come from the state sector, and I was still a very young and female member of staff. And so nobody paid much attention to me. And a boy dropped a crisp packet right in front of me in the corridor. So I challenged him and said, what do you think you're doing? Pick that up and put it in a bin. And he looked at me and said, well, miss, we have cleaners to do that. And so I put him in detention, initially for one night, but he was so bad about it that I put him in detention for the rest of the week. And every day he would go to my classroom, with basically cleaning scrubs on, and he would make the cleaner a cup of tea, and she would sit there and watch as he picked up all the litter. And I thought it was a salutary lesson, because these boys, they were all paying to be at the school, but it didn't mean to say that they were paying to treat other people as if they didn't matter and as if their work didn't matter. And from that, I got the reputation of not only being a head case that you didn't want to mess with, but also having a bit of a bee in my bonnet about litter. And so my room was always absolutely litter-free. And no boy would leave litter around his desk or on the floor in case I went mental again. And it was very good for everybody, I think.
Very, very good. Excellent. Now, with this series, the Mulberry series, these are thrillers. There's always a mystery at the heart of these. Are you approaching that any differently to the other genres? Because you write contemporary fiction, historical fiction, fantasy fiction. Are you approaching this in a different way to those other genres? Are you thinking, right, I'm in thriller mode now?
Not really. Not the way you would expect me to, partly because they're quite unusual thrillers anyway. They're not procedurals. They don't involve detectives. They don't have that structure. But also, the more I write, the more I realize that pretty much all my books have this thriller element, this element of reversal and suspense and surprise. So there's just a bit more of it with these books. But no, I don't think of them being as different, really, as some people think, because, I mean, I've never been a great fan of putting books into genre compartments anyway, and I think that my books particularly spill over into quite a lot of different genres, if you like. I think of them mostly as psychological stories where the past plays a very great role. And that's actually true of pretty much everything that I write anyway. In this case particularly, and in this case there is a murder at the heart of it, as there has been with the other books. But it's not, to me, a kind of classic thriller investigative novel. It's much more an unpicking of why somebody is as they are, why they would behave the way they do, what damage there is in their past, and why they're still dragging that baggage around with them. And this is true of all my characters, my villains, because Buckfast is quite definitely a monster, although I like her immensely for many reasons. But it's true of Straightley too, who is the good guy.
And I think that's the thing. You've always been, you've never allowed anyone to pin you down. You've never you were never the chocolat author, no matter how hard people tried. You were never the contemporary fiction author. You've always, avoided that. Have those choices always been deliberate? If you think, okay, I've done a Mulberry, then I'm going to do something different after that, or are they just coming at you? Are the ideas coming at you? Just you're writing them as they come, so to speak.
Well, I find that my process is cyclic and takes several years to form, and so it's not really so much a question of, I will do a Mulberry book next, or I will do a Chocolat book next. But I find that it's a little bit like a spacecraft orbiting a solar system. I will take a number of years to make an orbit, and I will go to a certain place. And I know that I'm rhythmically and temperamentally in a certain zone. And so I'm in a Chocolat zone, or I'm in a Mulberry zone, or I'm in that kind of weird little hinterland where pretty much anything could happen zone. So it does take me a long time. It's not as if my bringing out a book a year means that I'm writing a book a year at that speed. It doesn't always mean that, because very often I will be working on more than one thing at once. And so I'll start something, I'll give it time to percolate. I will work on something else during that time. And then after an interval of maybe 4 or 5 years, the book will emerge. And it will have taken it all that time to get to that point. So it's not a conscious process, but it is, I think, a rhythmic, organic process, which just has to do with my mental state and the slowness of my process and my thinking, and having to work out these intricate plots and also surprise myself in the writing of them, which to me is quite important.
So does there come a point you're allowing these sort of ideas to orbit in your solar system? They're slowly, ideas are sort of glomming onto them. Does there come a point where you think, now the time is right?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes there is a kind of little catharsis. And sometimes it's much more a question of having ideas, pulling them together in the dark, thinking, what shape is this? What story am I telling? Where is it? I mean, to me, the where of it is quite an important thing, because I wouldn't be able to write a chocolat story in Morbury. It wouldn't work. It would have a different color palette. It would have different social and cultural filters over it. And so I know quite early on when something is going to be set, where it's going to be set, because those things are integral parts of building the story anyway. So yes, I suppose you could say that does happen.
Wonderful stuff. Let's give a quick plug as well, because your book, 10 Things About Writing, which I have on my phone, there we go, so I can take it with me everywhere. And it's one I dip into an awful lot. The only disadvantage with the ebook is it jumps you straight to the introduction. And I hadn't realised till now, there's a cartoon at the very front. And it's an illustration.
There are Mousseline cartoons and they're terrific.
Exactly. Right at the front, it says, Andrea, she's sitting on the sofa with a remote control. She says, Andrea dreams of getting a novel serialised one day, if she can be bothered to write it. So what was a lot of listeners will be like, yeah. What was the motivation behind 10? Because you do these wonderful 10 things about Twitter threads, and you're still doing them now, and they're really wonderful. Where did the idea for the book come from?
Well, people kept telling me that I should put my Twitter threads into a book. They've been telling me this for I don't know how many years I've been doing Twitter threads like this, maybe 10 years. And I've always felt that, they were just bits of Twitter fun, and they were in response normally to questions. And there are a lot of writers on Twitter, and I found that I was getting a lot of the same questions. And so I thought, okay, I'll make this a bit more formalized, and I will keep a little database of them. And people kept saying, oh, no, you should make it a book. You should make it a book. And I thought, really? No, I don't think so. I don't have time. And then lockdown happened, and suddenly time was a slightly different thing. And I found also that many people who were locked down were using the opportunity to look at perhaps either finishing a book they'd started or writing the book that they had all wanted to write. I was getting a lot more inquiries about how to do that. And I thought, okay, maybe this is the time I can do it. And so I got in touch with a small press, September Press, because small presses needed a lot of support at that time too. And I said, would you be interested in this? And they said, would we ever? And so they brought it out initially as an ebook so that it could be available almost immediately. So that people in lockdown could use it and benefit from it right then. And then it came out in hardback the next year. And I did an audiobook too, where I do the narration, if people like audiobooks. So, yeah, it was really that. It was about circumstances and what I felt to be a visible demand, and also just supporting people at a difficult time, because, God help us, the arts is in a bad enough way as it is. We need to stick together.
Absolutely. We normally ask our guests how their lockdown was. But then in December 2020, on top of all the usual lockdown woes, you announced that you had breast cancer, which would be, is the news no one wants to hear.
Well, quite.
What did that do to your world, and in particular your writing world? Because you're, as you say, you're working on ideas. You've got ideas going around in solar systems. We're always thinking of the future writers. We're thinking of the next book. We're thinking of the book after that. Did it change your perspective on any of that? Did it change the way you wrote? Did it bring any projects to the fore?
Well, it's interesting because I felt, at the time I'd been saying, well, lockdown hasn't been too bad for me because I'm very privileged, because I have space, because I work from home anyway, because I haven't lost significant amounts of work from lockdown. And then boom, all of a sudden I get this breast cancer diagnosis, which kind of knocked me sideways. I was lucky in the sense that it was an early diagnosis and I had very good prospects, to be able to walk away from it quite soon. But I had to go through chemo, and of course I lost all my hair, and I was exhausted, and I had brain fog a lot of the time. And I tweeted about this because I felt that I wasn't alone in this, and there were a lot of other people who might be going through the same thing. And I realized that was also absolutely true. But thinking about it while it was happening, I remember telling myself repeatedly that, if you are going to have an embuggerance, as dear old Terry Pratchett used to call it, you might as well have it during lockdown, where you don't feel that you're having to cancel a lot of events and basically miss out on things. In certain ways, the timing of it was fortunate timing, if that could be said to be true of any cancer diagnosis. What it did do, it gave me a certain amount of fatigue and brain fog, but I didn't stop writing. I kept writing throughout. I think I'm one of those people who tends to escape from problems into fiction, and so it was quite welcome to keep working. I mean, I do look at some of the first draft things that I did at that time, and I think, well, my brain was only half operating there, because I'm missing whole words and bits of sentences out, because that's how brain fog works. But I got through it, and it was also very interesting to see how social media responded, because I felt that social media was not only supportive, but also, actually in some way inspirational. I've always felt that a lot of my stories, and particularly my school stories, came from the human contact that I got on a day-to-day basis when I was a teacher. Mm-hmm. And because I can't do that now, I get my human contact from face-to-face appearances with the public, but also with interactions on things like Twitter, which are so responsive and so very much about personal experiences that very often I feel that that's where I get my human interactions nowadays. So there was that, and that didn't stop, and that was very helpful.
Good. We're recording this on the day that it's been announced that Twitter will be under new management in the near future. So hopefully that won't change too much. We'll have to see how that progresses.
I hope it doesn't. It doesn't. I'm not planning on leaving.
No.
Not just because of new management, although. Yes, no change in that direction is particularly good for most people who like Twitter and genuinely enjoy using it. But, as long as the block button exists, I think I'll be just fine.
We've got some listener questions for you, Joanne. Actually, the first one, this is the thing that authors dread at festivals and conferences, where someone says, this isn't a question, it's more of a statement, but it's from Elizabeth Hurley, who says, just tell her she's awesome. Any response to that, Joanne?
Well, thank you. It's always nice to have my certainties confirmed here. No, it's really nice. Honestly, it's quite rare for people to come and just say nice things to authors. Very often, people come when they have a complaint, but they sort of take it for granted that you know that they like you, and that's not always true at all. So yes, thank you. That's very much appreciated.
It's the ones who tell you how your book should have ended. They're the fun ones.
Well,
I have a question from Tanya Scott, who says, I know Joanne has spoken at a lot of writing festivals. Which would she recommend attending? So if you're a writer and you're looking to get glean some wisdom from authors, any particular festivals worth attending?
Well, attending as an author, I would say, always look at what they're paying you and make sure that you're not out of pocket. We had long conversations on Twitter yesterday about this. Some festivals are still not aware that some authors are actually not able to afford to attend because they're not paying them enough to cover their expenses, which is a disgrace, especially when they're asking people to pay for tickets. They should be able to cover paying their contributors. If they can't, there's something deeply wrong with their business model. I wouldn't attend as a punter a festival that didn't pay its contributors either, because I just think it's unfair and exploitative to do that. As a punter, there are some. It depends where you are, really. It depends what you like. As both, as an author and as a person attending festivals, I always enjoy Edinburgh enormously because it's so friendly and diverse, and there is something for everybody. It really does depend on what you like. Some festivals have particular audiences because they tend to favour particular kinds of author. Oxford, for instance, has a lot of cookery writers and military historians because that is their general demographic. Edinburgh is much more all-inclusive and welcoming. I happen to like Dartington because it's just such a pleasant environment and it's such a beautiful place. And it feels like a kind of privilege just to be there, although it is an awful schlep there on the train for me. But I also like little festivals like Wigtown, for instance, which is just delightful, and the whole community seems to take part in the festival, which to me is part of the fun of a festival. So really, I think it's a question of looking where you are and what you like the look of and who's going there, because generally you can tell from the guests who enjoys coming again and again and who feels looked after. And that's important too.
Very true. Very true. Christopher Wills has a question. What book would you love to write one day but haven't yet? Is there one out there that's... Because you sometimes hear authors saying, I've got an idea for a book, but I'm not ready to write it yet. I haven't reached a stage in my life, or that I haven't figured out what it's about yet. Is there a project out there that's tantalizingly out of reach?
Oh, well, that's always my case. There's always something like that. Because of the way I work, there's always a little bundle of space dust out there that I know is going to be something at some point, but I don't quite know what it is. So, but that's the way it works for me. There's always something slightly out of reach, because actually, if your reach exceeds your grasp, then you're doing something wrong. I did at one point. I wrote a Doctor Who book. I'd love to write a Blake Seven book next. That's my secret bucket list. That would be quite nice. That I would enjoy doing that in much the same way that I enjoyed doing the Doctor Who book.
Brilliant. Oh, let's make that happen. Tracy Montague has a question. Well, has several questions. I'll take a deep breath here. Tracy says, does Joanne use software such as Pro Writing Aid? Is she a planner or a pantser? How many edits did she do for her last book? Was it a similar number to the first? Her characters are very well drawn. How much pre-book backstory does she have in her characters? Do they just grow as she writes? Tracy says, can everyone tell I've been neck deep in editing for the longest time? So let's break these down, shall we? Do you use software such as Pro Writing Aid or Grammarly to sort of check stuff before you send it off?
No, I don't do that. I literally read entrails. I don't do any of the software thing. To me, all of that is such a barrier to my organic, natural process that I just can't be bothered with it. It's not particularly that I'm a technophobe. It's that I just don't see what it would offer me. That notebooks and pens and just an ordinary Microsoft Word will also offer me. And so I think those things to me would be very much of a distraction. When it comes to editing, I think plotting and pantsing was the next one. Yes. I don't really believe in the distinction between those two things. I think, when you've written as many books as I have, it's a little bit like planning lessons. When I was a very junior teacher, I used to plan every lesson perfectly, and I knew exactly what I was doing, and it would be there in a lesson plan because I was being observed and people would want to look at my lesson plans. When I wasn't being observed, by the time I'd got a sense of rhythm, I could just basically work out my lesson plan while I was humping my bag of books and my satchel of papers from one room to the next. And by the time I'd got there, I knew what the lesson plan was going to be. It's a little bit like that. When you get the rhythms of things in your head and you can start to get a feel of how the structure of your book is going to work, then you don't need to be as architectural a plotter as when you were starting off. I mean, that's my process. Some people like to stick to the lesson plan thing because it's comforting and it makes them feel that there's a structure that they can hang things on, which is also fine. Nowadays, I do a little bit of both. I approach the book with a number of key ideas and events and a general structural trajectory, and then I allow the details to fill themselves in a kind of organic way. So basically it's a walk in the woods. I know more or less where I'm going, but not what I'm going to find on the way, which to me is the way to maintain interest and surprise, which to me, the element of self-surprise, particularly when you're writing a thriller, is really important. And when it comes to editing, I find that I edit as I go along anyway. So editing is part of my writing process. What I do in the mornings when I start is that I will read aloud the section that I wrote the day before. And reading aloud is, I think, the best editorial tool anybody has. I will do a kind of baby adjustment to whatever I have line by line there. Then I will be in the zone to write, which is good. It's a dual process. It's partly getting a bit of editing done and also getting into the headspace. And that's generally how I approach editing when I look at a first draft. So by the end of a first draft, usually line by line, it's pretty clean because of the process I use. Then I will look at structure, and I'll generally find that there is a certain amount of detailing which needs to be put in, structural detailing, sometimes moving events around, sometimes inserting scenes that need to be there for purposes of characterization or whatever. You asked about characterization also. With me, it's very much a question of getting to know those characters. So I don't need to have stupendous amounts of backstory. It helps to have it in your head, but I think working it out in any kind of official way tends to tempt people to do a lot of front loading and info dumping about their character at the beginning of the book, which is generally not a great idea. So I like the reader to get to know the character they would a person. So if you're getting to know a person, you don't need a whole load of stuff about their background, but it's quite nice when you're fed small bits of information about it as you go through the story, because as you get to know them, you get to understand their responses to things and sometimes to second guess what they might do, which is, again, part of connecting with a character in a book. I tend to do maybe 3 edits. Mm-hmm. I'll do one kind of dirty first draft for myself. I'll usually do another pass over that where I'll fill in the main details. Then I will give it to my editor, who will give me some notes, and I will then do another one on the basis of those notes. And that's usually all I need. Unless something unusual happens, unless I need to. Sometimes I need to take the whole thing apart like a Rubik's Cube and put it back together again. And so if I do heavy structural editing, I'll probably do another one. But 3 or 4 is usually enough for what I do.
Wonderful. Just going back to characters for a moment. When you have a series and you have returning characters, it's usually a case of getting to know them a bit more, testing them harder than maybe, or in a different way than you did the time before. But when you have a new disruptive character like Rebecca Buckfast, does she, how do you develop her in relation to the series characters? Do you think, okay, she's in opposition to my regular series character, she's going to test them in this particular way, or does she evolve as you're writing?
Well, she evolved as I was writing, but I'd also, because I'd written about her before, but she was a secondary character, and so there wasn't anything from her perspective. There was just her behavior. And I thought, she's an interesting person, potentially. She's got a story. I don't know what it is. When it came to writing A Narrow Door, her story very much came to the forefront. And the reason for that was because I had another story, which I'd written actually as a screenplay for a TV company sometime before, and it was a school story and a ghost story, in fact. And for various reasons, it never got made. But I still had this story kicking around in my head. And I suddenly realized, as I was messing around with ideas, I suddenly realized that actually this was Buckfast's story. And so I thought, hey, what if I put it in here, and will it fit? And it fit perfectly. And I thought, right, okay, this is how it's going to be, which is why it has a slightly different tonal quality to the other books. It feels more like a supernatural. It's more that kind of story. And also she is very much more in the forefront than antagonistic characters have previously been in this series. And that's partly why, because I wanted to tell her story from a particular perspective. That doesn't always happen. But I like the element of surprise in characters too. I like opening a character up in a different way and going, this is a whole new thing about them. I didn't know this. Let's go in, let's explore this and do a deep dive on why this character is like that. And also when you do have returning characters like Roy Straightley, how on earth are they going to cope with this? If they find this out, what will they do? Because very much, with me in any way, the creation of drama has been very much always about putting people under pressure to see what they'll do, just squeezing them to see where the pressure is going to come out and how they're going to respond and what they're going to reveal of themselves when that happens. And will they still turn out to be this character of moral integrity, or will we see them collapse? Is always an element of the tension within any story that's character driven like these.
Wonderful. Who are you going to be squeezing next, Joanne? What's coming up next for you?
Well, I have just finished the dirty-ish first draft of a book called Broken Light, which is a standalone book, although there is a little bit of a nod to Mowbray in it, although it's not a St. Oswald's book. And it's a kind of, I guess it's a kind of feminist psychological thriller with some supernatural aspects to it. Basically, imagine if Carrie White hadn't died at the prom at all. If she'd actually if none of that had happened and she'd lost her powers at 13 and none of that high school drama had happened and she'd lived to be a reasonably unhappily married woman of nearly 50 and she'd got her powers then. Imagine menopause, Carrie.
Oh my God!
So that's my story.
I'm gonna pitch that to my wife.
I've enjoyed it hugely.
It sounds amazing. It sounds absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. Well, Joanne, over 5 years ago now, you were one of the first authors we interviewed for the podcast, and you've inspired countless writers out there. I did ask you, I made the mistake. I said, have you had any advice for aspiring writers? And you said, ditch the word aspiring. It's bullshit. Just write. And that's been a mantra throughout this 5 years. And it's inspired countless authors out there, many of whom have gone on to get deals and self-publish and publish in extraordinary ways and voices that might never have been heard otherwise. So we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for that ongoing inspiration. And we can't wait to read what you've got coming out next. Thank you so much.
And to you, thank you.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. OBE.
I know, couldn't it?
It doesn't get much better than that, does it?
Well, Damehood is the one after that, and then Queen. I'm not sure how it works. I don't really. Yeah.
Wow. So tell me, Mark, when you did the in-person interview with Joanne at the theatre, did she know about the OBE before? Literally, was it that day that she found out?
It was that day because they were all announced in the morning because it was Jubilee week.
How does that work? How does someone get an OBE? Does they have to be nominated or?
You know what? I don't know. I think there is a selection process, and they look at people who've done something extraordinary in their field. Because Ian Rankin, he's Sir Ian Rankin now, so he was announced on the same day.
Wow!
And particularly if you've done a lot of work. I mean, this is why I mentioned Joanne. being part of this. She's the chair of the Society of Authors, which is such an important force for good for writers in the UK. And she's been very vocal in standing up for the rights of authors. She talked there about making sure authors get paid at festivals. And ALCS, the Licensing and Collecting Society, they make sure that, when our books are photocopied, when we get stuff in magazines, and also for screenwriters, I get stuff from ALCS for screenwriting. When Robot Overlords is shown on telly in Poland, I get a few quid, it's nice. Twice a year. It's stuff like that, standing up for the author. And she's been absolutely brilliant about it. And as you know, and also you look at her social media and the stuff that she does, it inspires authors every day. It really does. So
She really does.
Well deserved.
She really does deserve, that recognition. And you're right. I mean, what she does in her outside of her, well, inside her writing life, but as a contribution to society. Like you say, it embodies her. Like a regular Twitter post. It's always about helping authors, and also just how she kind of how well she answered those listener questions. You can tell she's done a few of those before, hasn't she?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in that she was one of the first, if not the first, authors we interviewed for the podcast, and in a way, I think she set the tone for the podcast.
I think you're right. Yeah,
listening to her. When she said, ditch the word aspiring, it's bullshit. If you're a writer, if you write, you're a writer. And I thought that I'm going to go forward with that. That's, this isn't about, tricks or, it's about inspiring other people. If you're putting pen to paper, then you're one of us, and that's good enough for me.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about some of the things that came up in the interview. I was really fascinated by the way that this visual of kind of like these ideas all floating together towards a kind of mothership eventually.
Yes, the solar system.
It literally was like that. It's a very interesting approach and a very freeing way of coming up with and allowing the story to form, rather than sitting down and thinking, right, what's my hook? Because a lot of times we try and force that. We sit down and say, right, we need to nail this in one sentence before we start writing it. But I like the fact that Joanne gives herself time for those ideas to kind of all latch onto each other, and then stands back and looks at it and thinks, okay, so what have you got here? Oh, okay, this is what it is. And it's often not what you maybe would expect, but that is some way maybe part of the magic of her storytelling, is that it's something very, very unique and could never have happened any other way, possibly.
Yes, and giving it time just to simmer and to grow. And I mean, if you're going to stick with the solar system analogy, you've had your Big Bang. There's debris flying around all over the place, and eventually these planets accrete into something round and planet-looking. So and for me, it's with my notebooks, and I know I've bored listeners with this before, but my notebooks. There's one here which I haven't. There we go. Oh, hang on. Which I haven't touched in months, and it was an idea that I sort of jotted down some ideas, and it wasn't quite working. And then just yesterday, I thought, aha! And then half a page there of notes, and I probably won't come back to that for weeks. I'll come back to that again, in a few weeks when inspiration strikes again. I've got other projects. I've got my main projects that I'm getting on with, but that notebook is where those ideas go, and that's and after time, it will reach a sort of critical mass where I think, yeah, I've got the story now. When
you talk about those planets, kind of all debris forming and planets, is that another version of world building? Literally, I mean,
I guess it is,
isn't it?
I guess it is.
It's kind of like literally takes the term in its literal sense. So, I also find that I really want to talk about the experience that Joanne went through with breast cancer as well, because I know she was very public about that. But listening to her talking about it was really interesting, because it really honed me kind of to that really, really important sense that thinking about what happened to Joanne, it happened to her, she was a very established author. It's happening to her after she's written many, 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 many books. And I think about all those people that have been putting off writing a book for so many years, and then something like that hits them. And then they look back and think about all of the missed opportunities, if you like. And it's a really important reminder for everyone out there. If you're kind of thinking of writing a book, if you're struggling getting through your first book, and, if you keep coming back to a book and you don't think you have the time, it's a really good reminder that you just never quite know what life's going to throw at you. And so banking those words is creating that legacy, creating those books. And I just think it's really important for people to remember that, because I think we can get too busy with life. And I can imagine from Joanne's perspective, that it did probably come right out of and hit her like a bolt out of the blue. But there must have been some comfort in some, strange way of looking back and saying, look at all this incredible work that I've created over my lifetime. I've not wasted that time, or I've not I've been writing my dream out every single day, and people have been sharing that with the world. And this is what I really want people to kind of to latch onto, this idea of, are you really making the most of every day? Don't put off tomorrow, right?
I'm gonna misquote this probably, but there is a quote from Terry Pratchett who said, just before you die, your life does flash before your eyes. It's called living.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it. It's happening right now. It's happening right this very second, and it's gone. That second is gone. Oh, there goes another one, and there goes another. Oh, they keep. Yeah, we just before we hit record, we realise it's almost the middle of June. How the bloody hell did that happen?
I know.
Well,
we said, didn't we? I said I walked into the studio this morning, and it felt really warm, and I thought, finally, after 2 months of rain, it feels like summer. And then I look at the date on my watch, and we're 2 weeks away from the longest day of the year. And I'm like, no, I want more. It should be every year. It happens every year. And it's a really good, the passing of the seasons is another really good way of reminding ourselves that time is moving forward, regardless of whether we move with it.
Life is for living. And if you're in your 20s listening to this going, trust me, when you get to, I'm 49, and it's like someone has put a brick on the accelerator. It's like whoosh, 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 whoosh. So this is why I'm spending every day writing, as many words as I possibly can, because it's the only chance I've got.
Do you know, it's a bit of a kind of scary thought for some people. I love this kind of discussion, but I learned that chickens have a certain number of eggs that they lay. It's kind of predetermined before they start laying, and they eventually lay their last egg. And for anyone who has chickens, those like old grandmother hens that you've got kicking around, not contributing to the house.
Outside,
right? Free. But then they've done, they've earned their dividends, if you like. Yeah, exactly. But it made me think the other day, as I was looking at these chickens, I was thinking it's the same for authors. In fact, I mean, we can use the author as an analogy, but each author has a predestined number of words that they write in their lifetime. We don't know what it is, but we do know that if we don't write today, we've missed that opportunity to bank those words.
You're talking about predestination now. That's an even bigger topic, and I'm not sure I've got a hard out at 6 o'clock. I'm not sure we're going to cover that in the next 25 minutes.
Deep dive. But no, it's interesting, isn't it? Think about that. Like if we miss a day's writing, or a week's writing, or a month's writing, or a year's writing, those are days that we're never going to get back to write. And we know that you can't cram your books like we used to cram our essays at school, the night before. Like if you're lying there in your on your deathbed, you're not going to be writing a book. So
no, that's true. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But you can cram words during the day. 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there on your phone.
But it's about dictating. It's about cramming regularly. It's not about what's my analogy is. It's like Brewster's Millions, where he's given $1 million or whatever that he's got to get rid of in 24 hours, and I think too many people are putting off writing their book because they think I'll do it when, the household's a little bit less busy, when the kids are grown up, when I retire, all those things. And I think that's a really important thing that Joanne's reminded us of, that things can happen and things can change our outlook and change our ability to even write. I look at people who get dementia in their later years, and that might be the years they plan to write their book, and now they're not capable of doing it. So it just struck me. It's one of those big moments to say to everyone, if you're putting this off, don't put it off anymore. This, like Mark said, living is happening today, and you've just got to start writing. If that's your dream, you've just got to write.
It's weird you mentioned Brewster's Millions. Not an hour ago, I was looking it up for a thing.
What?
Because it was the novel.
Really?
The novel was written in 1902.
No way.
And there was Cecil B. DeMille co-directed a silent version of the film, which is considered a lost film because a lot of silent movies got destroyed. There are hundreds of movies that we'll never see because they were destroyed. And then there was I think there was another version of it in the 50s or 60s, and then there was the Richard Pryor one, which is probably the one we all know.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
So yeah, it's so weird you mentioned that.
Bizarre, because Brewster's Millions is something that I use a lot in my coaching, actually, because I always relate it to like people that work hard all their life to build some kind of wealth, and then once they get to that, they hit that pinnacle, they're like, what now? And then they try and give it all away as quickly as possible in the latter years of their lives to try and do good in the world. And it's like this madcap kind of like, got to give it all away before I die type thing. So I always use that analogy for writing, because I think we're giving away in a way, when we're writing our words, we're giving away our stories. We're capturing those because eventually they become public domain as well, like long after our death.
Yes.
So it's there's a lot of analogies there, but yeah, it's a bit early in the morning here. Actually, it's not even 10 o'clock. But I'm what I wanted to say as well with Joanne is I'm so grateful to her for being public about the experience that she had. Especially as an author going through breast cancer. I think a lot of people would, not be able to do that. And I think, again, it's another testimony to her contribution that she's able to kind of talk about it and be open about it and be real about it and still inspire people through that journey, which is fantastic. She did also say as well, linked to that, she said that she escapes from problems through fiction, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah,
well, I think most writers do, don't we? Or like I've said before, it's how we make sense of the world. I like to pick a particular theme and tackle it and look at it from different angles and throw different characters at it and see what happens. And she talked about, putting people under pressure to reveal what they'll do. And this is the great what if that we love about writing. If we had to, like Bruce did, if we had to give away $1 million, I think in the original book it was $1 million in 24 hours or something like that. Of course, in the later versions, it's a lot more. How would we do that? What would we do in that situation? And that's why I think it's an enduring concept. It's one of those ideas that, you come back to it and you think, well, I'd do it this way. What would you do? I'd do it. So it provokes thought,
Yes.
So yeah, I think, when I walk through that door every morning and sit down at the desk, I'm not thinking about anything. And very often I come down those stairs, I've got the first clue. I've usually left a note for myself. And Joanne, I love what Joanne was saying. She reads aloud every morning before moving on. So I sit down and that's it, door closed. When I was commuting and writing, it was headphones on, shut the world off. Here we go. And it's my happy place. And it's I love it.
And actually, on that note, Mark, we do have to clarify what Joanne said. And this is my interpretation of it, but what Joanne said about editing as you go. Her version of editing as you go was reading aloud the words that she'd previously written. What we've talked about editing on the go being the biggest sin that an author does. But when we talk about it, we've always talked about it being, as you write each sentence, you're going back and changing a typo or and that's the thing that slows you down. So it's an interesting version of editing as you go is that and it's reminded me of you doing your commute, where you'd edit on the way home, you'd write on the way to work, you'd edit what you'd done on the way home.
Yeah.
But it's having those two things in two pots.
Yeah, I'd be, fresh and excited and alert in the morning, drowsy going home, but at least I could go through what I'd written and make changes and leave myself notes for the next morning. I mean, we when we spoke to Michael Connolly, he said that he often goes back and rewrites stuff just as a sort of run-up to break through the barrier of the blank page. So he'd go back, rewrite stuff, and then by the time he got to the bit where he might be stuck, his fingers are already moving, he's already typing, he's reacquainted himself with the themes and the situations and the characters, and he just keeps going. So I think reading aloud every morning is really interesting. I've just this week, if you listen to last week's episode, you'll know that I realized that my antagonist wasn't working in my book, and I've just spent the last week going back and completely rewriting some chapters because of that, and it's been really, really good fun, actually. We've said before, get to the end and then go back and rewrite. But because I know I can finish a book, I've gone back and just this morning I've got to the bit where I got stuck before because the antagonist wasn't working, and now I'm like, yes, here we go. I know what happens next. So there is a lot to be said for that. Just going back a bit and then breaking through, going back a bit and breaking through. If that, there's no rules, there's no hard and fast rules. Whatever works for you guys, it's you'll find your own way.
Yeah. And actually, Joanne's idea of reading aloud as the first thing she does, it did feel like that, a warm-up stretch to get into writing, in the same way that Joe Hill plays the piano, to get his mind going. Yeah. And in the same way that Michael Connelly does his kind of like rewind and get a running jump into his writing session. So these are all great tips and things I recommend everyone should just try out, see what works for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we're back to one of the greatest debated topics on the podcast, Mark, aren't we? Plotting v pantsing. And I actually really liked how Joanne talked about this. She said, I don't believe in a distinction between the two. And I think as we've kind of matured through the podcast, we've grown more and more to that idea that you can be either, you can be both. You can be one on one day, you can be another on another day, and we're kind of doing both all the time as a writer, aren't we? In some ways, and it was interesting to hear how Joanne kind of viewed that. Yeah,
and very often when we talk to people who plan ahead, and this is how I did it when I used to do it in very those very detailed outlines, 50,000 words, is that it was essentially a skinny first draft. A very skinny first draft where you're just not putting on the layers that you might necessarily have, if you were pantsing it. So, every form of storytelling is a journey of discovery. It's not like a novel ever just lands in your lap fully written. You've got to put the hours in and figure out what it's about. Some people do, might like to do it in beats and story blocks and then fill in the gaps. And that's all cool for you. If that's what works for you. For me, going back to handwriting has been the big change for me, and just writing nonsense. And then at some point that nonsense turns into something that might look like prose. And that's how my day generally pans out. So I'm writing more words, but I'm finding those first drafts are a bit cleaner than they used to be when they were an outline. So whatever works for you.
Absolutely. And here's another kind of rule breaker where we hear a lot of authors, they create their entire backstory and they almost write a novel as a backstory, and they write character outlines in huge detail. And it was really refreshing to hear the reason why Joanne doesn't do that. And the fact that she said, when you do that, there's a tendency to info dump at the beginning of the book. You've got all this information that you want to tell everyone about. And then she said, it's better to get to know your characters gradually. And I thought, absolutely, it's so blooming obvious. But in real life, when we meet someone new for the first time, we don't just like tell them everything about our lives, unless you're seeing a therapist, of course. But right? But we don't kind of like tell them everything. Like if you're playing, there's a dance that happens with people. Like think of dating, for example. There's a dance that happens where you go out for your first coffee date, and you kind of get to know each other a little bit, and then as you get further and further down, say a relationship, you get to know them more. And then when you've been married to them, say for 20 years, every single,
But even then. Even then, people will still surprise you. I remember just a few years ago, I don't know if I should say this. It was a Father's Day thing, and me and my dad went out with my son George, and we went. It was Dad's and Son's Day. Went to the Imperial War Museum in London. Went around the Imperial War Museum. It was really good. And we're walking away, and we're going down the Kennington Road. And my dad saw the police station there, and he said, Kennington Road, Nick. Yeah, spent a few nights in there. I was like, what? And he said, oh, yeah. Drunk and disorderly when I was a young man, I'm like, Dad. And my son's going, cool. And I'm like, no, it's not cool. So that's my amazing dad. Known him all my life, So, yeah.
Dads are brilliant. Dads have got the best stories when you become an adult. Don't they?
Oh, God, my dad, I could tell you something.
Well, but you forget that they were once as daft as we were.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly, yeah. Exactly.
They had to go through the process of making mistakes, and learning from mistakes. And as we both know, having, kind of young adult sons, they're going, it's like the rite of passage, right? And everyone, every parent has to watch their kids. But it's that kind of moment where the illusion shatters. You're like, what? You're not perfect, Dad. Yeah. I thought you were like, isn't it brilliant?
Funny enough, that's what Robot Overlords is about thematically, is that moment when you're a boy and you realize your dad is a human being. And not this person that you worship, their frailties and fears like everyone else. It's like, oh, I might have to do something myself rather than relying on my dad.
It's a very interesting, rite of passage. And as a parent, it's easy to forget as well when you see your kids going through their stages of their life. It's easy to forget that you've got to put yourself in their shoes and try and remember what it was like to think and see the world like they see the world. At that age, you forget, we've got all this kind of wisdom and knowledge that we think we have, but then everything's changed anyway. So what do we know, right? But the other bit I loved that Joanne said, which was brilliant, squeeze a character and see what comes out. Like put them in a tension situation, throw a conflict in there. We talked about this quite a lot on the podcast, but again, good to hear that re-emphasizes the importance of developing a character.
I needed to hear that this week as well, because one of the problems I had with my ending is I let, this is the fourth Woodville book, I let Faye off the hook. I put her in a situation and she was like, yeah, okay, and walked away from it. I'm like, actually, no. This really needs to hurt her. This really needs to bring her down and test her, and she needs to go away and think about it and come back with a better solution than that. So it was really good to hear that this week, because there is a tendency, if you love your characters, to let them off the hook a bit. No. You got to be horrible to them. You got to knock them down and see how they get up again.
Put them through the ringer.
Oh yeah,
as we did with Joe and Johanna in Back to Reality.
Absolutely.
We were really, really evil authors. But at the same time, here it's very important to remember. It's interesting because there's themes that come up again and again in the podcast, and people might think, well, I've heard this before, but it's like personal development books. When you read a personal development book, you get all excited and pumped up, and that lasts for about a week typically when you put the book, and then you get back into your old bad habits, and then you pick the book up again a year later and think, oh, why am I not doing this? And that's why it's great. Like to hear you say, Mark, I need you to hear that this week. Now, you know this stuff, you know it, but you have to be prompted and reminded. And we all have to as authors. Craft is not just about learning the craft, but remembering it and then using it and reusing it and then being reminded again. And that's why I love the fact that these topics keep coming up again and resurfacing the podcast. Because like you say, Mark, there'll be 1,000 people listening to this right now who'll be like, yeah, I need to remember that this week as well. Yeah. And it's what you need to hear in that week, wherever you're at in your journey of writing, and everyone's at a different place right now. Some people are struggling with their beginning. Some people can't finish their book. Others don't know what to do in the middle of the book. Some people are stuck with a character. But ultimately, there's always something that we all need to rehear. And I think it's brilliant.
Too true.
Absolutely
Very true.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you to Joanne for coming on the show again and inspiring us. Absolutely brilliant. Congratulations on the OBE. Absolutely brilliant. I must say, Mark, I've written this list that we're launching on the Academy soon, which is this milestones chart. We've worked on this.
OBE on there.
Well, the funny thing is, it's not on there. It's not on there. It's got all these things like, book as
MBE,
book of prize.
CBE, OBE. I'm not sure what order they go in. Knighthood. Yeah, you have to get them all on there.
It's kind of funny, isn't it? But
National Treasure. That's the top one, isn't it?
National Treasure. Yeah, that's the kind of the people's OBE in some ways. And actually that applies to whatever country you're in, because I realise a lot of people can't get OBEs because, they're not part of the Commonwealth. But National Treasure, that's what everyone should be aiming for. Wouldn't it be brilliant? Wouldn't it be brilliant at the end of your life if you're in obituary, it said, Mark Stay was a national treasure. Like, wouldn't it almost doesn't get better than that, I think, in terms of...
Yeah, that ain't going to happen.
Hey, you never say never. You never say never. I mean, who knows, right? Contributions to podcast either. I mean, who knows, right? But think about it. Like, hopefully we've got a bit of time left. Might be doing a little bit more of this.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's brilliant and very well deserved. And I think should inspire everyone today. If you weren't inspired to get writing before that interview, I hope you are today.
Yes.
And talking about inspiring stories, what's happening on social media this week, Mr. Stay?
We've got, well, actually, it's interesting you just that. You've inspired people, Mr. D. You. So Josh Atkinson on the BXP group and our Facebook group, he said, yesterday I jump-started my motivation with a Mr. D visualization walk through the old library. And this is something you suggest, isn't it? Walk through a bookshop or a library and think about where your books are shelved. So Josh said, I took a look at where my books would be shelved if I write enough, I could bump Margaret Atwood to a new shelf. And I think it's an omen that I could see Michael Conley just beside me. His latest episode was fantastic. Thank you, Josh. And he also took a picture of the comic book shop where he'd like to hold his book launch. It's a local comic shop who recently opened a licensed bar in the back, and it's called the Hooded Goblin. And it's the kind of bookshop that I cannot walk past. If I see a shop called the Hooded Goblin, I guarantee I'm going in. Yeah. So, Josh, this is brilliant. I mean, you're in great company. Kate Atkinson, Margaret Atwood, so it's, one day, mate, one day.
Lots
let's
of great
see your book
authors.
there.
A-listed authors. Oh, he's an A-listed author. The only problem, Josh, with that word shelved is when I hear the word shelved, I think of the opposite. I think, my book's being shelved. It's like being pitched. But I love it. Maybe we should adopt that term, shelf booking. And I mean, if you've got your parents to thank for getting you A in the Yellow Pages. I mean, that's a bonus, isn't it? Really, right? Fantastic.
We've got a public declaration from Rachel Howes as well. Now, she's had a bit of a year, Rachel. She's moved, which is always stressful. She recently got COVID as well. I know she also has fibromyalgia, which is one hell of a condition to live with as well. But she says, look, things are looking up. See, that's the attitude, Rachel. She said, I got myself an accountability buddy, and we chose one morning during the last week to sit down at the same time and do what authors are meant to do. We checked in with each other hourly, and I got some productive stuff done. It was a huge morale boost for me and reignited the spark I needed. So I need to revise my 2022 public declarations. She said, I was worried about doing it as I'm very paranoid about other people's perceptions, and that in itself stirs the bubbling cauldron of my anxiety and depression. But then again, I know this place is a safe space. So it is, yeah. So The Porcelain Hand, her novel, is going to beta readers by 14th of July, and Poetry Anthology is going to launch on the 31st of July. So those are in the diary, Rachel. I'll be checking in on those. Deadlines, as Douglas Adams said, love the whooshing noise they make as they go by. But, you've set some, you've got an accountability buddy. This is all good stuff.
That's huge steps. Congratulations, Rachel. Yeah, I love accountability buddies. You cannot underestimate the value of them.
Absolutely.
Which is why we have them in the academy, because it's hard actually sometimes to find someone who's like-minded and can either keep up with you or go at the pace that you want to. So that's a brilliant step forward, Rachel, and every success to you.
Fantastic. And people sending in their favourite bookshops. Folks, if you've got a favourite bookshop, send it in. Let us know about it. We're dying to hear about them. Simon Gallimore recommends Munro's Books in Victoria, BC. Old-fashioned shop, eclectic, and I always find something I never expected there, which is always a joy in any bookshop.
I went there, Mark, only 3 weeks ago for the first time. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put a link in the show notes to that so you can check that out. Sheila McClure, well, we've got a whole list from Sheila. Rother Books in Battle, amazing friendly service. The owner has read nearly everything in there. And also Eagle Harbour Books in Banbridge Island, WA. Such a good store with an opulence of staff recommends an incredible selection of books. Pacific Northwest trinkets. I can't even say that. I put my teeth in, Sheila. And lovely service. So thank you very much for that. And you remember, I think it was last week, we got a recommendation for Right Blend Bookshop. Well, we've got another one from Steve Gowland. Steve Gowland says, I can recommend Right Blend in North Liverpool. This is the shop that has books, but also vinyl as well. And he recommends the owner, Bob Stone, who's also an author, has helped many local little represented authors by offering free book launches over the last 7 years the shop has been open. He is a champion for all writers and a ruddy good bloke. His books are excellent too. So Bob, we salute you.
Come on, Bob, front door, as featured on the bestseller experiment poster. Go for it.
Yes,
Sounds like a legend, doesn't he?
Yeah, it really does. Really, really does. So if you want to drop us a line, find us on bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there. Or find us on social media with Bestseller Experiment on Facebook, and on Twitter and Instagram, we are at BestsellerXP. And if you've been inspired by Joanne Harris today, please give us a rating, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your writers group, spread the word.
And if you'd like to get our newsletter every week on email, pop along to the website and click on the newsletter tab. That's bestsellerexperiment.com. If you're interested in getting the writing habit for life, the 200-word challenge is your place of... it's just where you have to start, folks. It's awesome. It's brilliant. Just go there, 200wordchallenge.com. And if you're ready to take your writing to the next level, academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. So Mark, have a fantastic week, sir. Enjoy yourself. All the best with your writing, and look forward to chatting with you next week. So it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Are you ready to transform your writing and your life? Join the 200-word challenge today. In just 5 days, learn to develop a lifelong writing habit with over 2 hours of free expert coaching and the encouragement of a vibrant community. This program has already changed the lives of thousands of writers like you. No matter how busy you are, this challenge will show you that with just 200 words a day, you can significantly boost your creativity, productivity, mental health, and confidence, propelling you towards the end. For the first time, receive comprehensive coaching and step-by-step guidance, all for free. Transform your writing habit and start your journey to become the writer you've always aspired to be. What are you waiting for? Sign up for free now at 200wordchallenge.com and make writing a part of your daily life for life.
To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the 2 Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.